I have approximately 14 years of experience. Most of it is in corporate tax and international tax, and I started getting interested in the subject of transfer pricing a couple of years back, and I've focused on it since then. I was observing very interestingly that you had a session on the first day by the stalwart of the ITES industry, Mr. Barindra Sanyal. How was, what were your key takeaways from that session? Because that's probably the only industry person I. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. And I noticed from the slides that there was a fair bit of discussion on transfer pricing as well. And any particular takeaway that stuck to your mind from that conversation? Okay. But I think getting a perspective from the industry is a completely different experience, and then I'm glad you picked up the most important point, which is they don't start thinking from a tax perspective. Business drives decisions, and transfer pricing is really stuck between business and tax. Unfortunately or fortunately, it's a part of the tax law, but it asks you to apply economic principles. And tax is not necessarily driven by economic principles. It's driven by form. It's driven by language of the law. Form of the transaction is driven by the language of the law. And we have enough number of tribunal decisions who, and we'll speak about them during the course of this session. We have enough number of tribunal decisions that have given the form of the law more precedence in the economics of the transaction. Which is never the intent of transfer pricing. That's not how transfer pricing is practiced elsewhere in the world. But in India, we are in a peculiar situation, and which is why you have a tax professional discussing transfer pricing with you, not an economist discussing transfer pricing with you. But I wear two hats, I have to say, because if you don't wear the economist hat, you are only going to go this far in understanding and appreciating the subject, and more importantly, resolving it to the satisfaction of a client's business requirements. So I said what I said, and I hope you can anchor some of the conversation we have during the next 3 hours to that. But let's start the session. So this is how I intend to run the session. It's 3 hours. I don't know whether that's long or short, but let's use it to our advantage. I cannot speak for 3 hours. I'll be honest with you. And the other advantage we have is that we are a very small group of people, which either signifies two things: that the topic's not interesting, or it signifies that we have a bunch of really interested people who decided that they wanted to take 3 days out of the busy schedule. And so we have a higher level of interest than we would generally have because we have a smaller group. So I'm going to use that to my advantage, which is I'm going to use a lot of the 3 hours in an interactive discussion. So the other reason I'm going to do that is because I also need to make sure you're not sleeping. It's 2:30. I hope some of you have taken a nap before starting this session, because people generally feel sleepy at this time. So that I'm trying to achieve multiple objectives, which is what I always try to do, which is try to make the best of what we have today. We have a small group, so let's make it really interactive. I would be very happy if at the end of this session you felt you understand business issues, how they juxtapose with transfer pricing, and how sometimes the law conflicts with that, and how sometimes the solution lies in the law. I'll be very happy if you take away that, and that's the best way you're going to understand transfer pricing for this particular industry. It's an extremely dynamic industry. We'll talk about it in a bit more, but I'll be very happy as a speaker if that's what you take away. And I think you'll see you will contribute to that by asking questions, by participating in the discussion. So I earnestly request you to do that. With that expectation and hope, let's start the session and see where it goes. So the way I've structured the slides, not too many slides per se. I think most of you have it's there in your pack, and some of you may even glance through it. These slides are talking points, but really they're organized around 4 buckets. The first bucket is to talk about the environment, and we need to talk about the business environment as much as about the transfer pricing environment. So we'll talk about both of that. Then I realized, and I didn't have a list of participants here, but some of you seem to be like from a tax background, obviously, because this is a tax conference, not a TP conference. And some of you are from industry, some of you are from consulting, law firms, as well as from Big Fours. So I was wondering whether I should divide issues between legal issues, economic issues, should I use case laws to drive the discussion? And I said, let me not do that. If the organizers have decided to make it an industry event, let's divide it into 2 separate industries. There is an outbound industry, which is the likes of TCS. You met Mr. Sanyal on the first day. And that's a different business model, right? That's outbound. The business is driven from India. So if it's a different business model, the transfer pricing model has to be different. The transfer pricing issues have to be different, logically. And we'll talk about that in a separate bucket. Then we'll talk about the inbound industry, which is essentially your, Accentures of the world, the IBMs of the world, this significantly large number and small number, and even in small in size, number of ITES companies, what we call as captive companies, which are essentially large multinationals doing business outside India, clients outside India, but they have outsourced a part of the work to India. That's what I'm referring to as the inbound companies. And again, different business model as far as India is concerned, so the business issues ought to be different, the transfer pricing issues ought to be different, and we'll talk about that as a separate bucket. And I think the other thing that we want to talk about is, it is, the ITES industry is the bugbear of the tax authorities. It is the most litigated industry as far as transfer pricing issues are concerned. I'm sure some of your earlier sessions told you about the key tax issues, 10A, 10AA, denial of tax holiday, indirect tax issues. I think the session's on Saturday, which is about denial of input credits, refunds are stuck up and all that. But if I look at the 750, 800 tribunal judgments, more than 60% are on the ITES industry, and I'll share my insights on why is that. So it's the strategy to resolve disputes is also a very important component of your roles as consultants and clients. And there's a fair bit of, because if the disputes are so wide and there got to be alternate strategies, so it can't be one simple strategy of going to appeal. So there are 3-4 options available, and we'll spend a fair bit of time around that. And here's where I will definitely want you to ask questions. You would have some experience based on your client situations or otherwise around dispute resolution, what works, what doesn't work, what's been the experience, what do we advise clients depending upon the facts of each case. Here we'll try to make it more interactive than the other sessions. So really these are the four buckets. Fine with that so far? Yeah? Sleep check number 1. Fine with that so far? Perfect. Okay. Business environment. The most promising industry in India. Is that a fair statement? Just look at the growth. It used to be a $100 million industry and is estimated to be $300 billion in 2020. You can't imagine the growth we're talking about. So it's very natural that over a period of time, we've been able to leverage that, and driven by the fact that the cost differential of doing an activity here vis-a-vis doing an activity in the location abroad is significant. We call it location savings in transfer pricing. And we'll speak about location savings. And really that's the driver, that the location savings and the ability of our people to actually do these jobs that are being outsourced to us is significant. Now, do you have a sense what level of location savings we are talking about? If a job costs X in the US or Europe, what do you think it costs in India to do? But which is why it is being outsourced to India, offshore to India. Less than 0.5x. So you're saying 5%. Oh, okay, okay, sorry. 50% is too high. 50% will not be worth offshoring to India. The telecom cost, proximity to customer, which is important, you're giving that away when you offshore work to a offshore location. Training costs, you're taking risk on the country's economic climate, political climate. Suddenly something, suddenly India decides, like it asked Coca-Cola to leave in 1976, I think. Suddenly India decides. The tax climate of the country may not be conducive enough, which is what we are facing today. The tax climate is not conducive enough. So 50% we'll probably reach there in 5 years, but when these, and I used to work with McKinsey a couple of years ago, and we were evaluating setting up our own offshoring location in India. The cost saving was 90%. All in costs. I'm not talking about labor costs only. So that is the reason why we have grown from $100 million not too long back to, by the end of the next election, by the end of this government, the new government's thing will be $300 billion. So that is the potential we're talking about. But, and the part that I want you to remember is out of this discussion, which is important for you to understand the industry and the drivers of the growth. So one was location savings. The other part is what the gentleman here said, technology. It's natural that we will start here, but we'll get so good at doing what we do that we will improve on what was outsourced to us, right? It's natural. We'll do better than what they were doing it there. Not only we will do it cheaper, but we'll do it better. So over a period of time, we will start developing our own know-how. We will start developing our own technology. We will automate things. They were probably doing it manually. We will find a technology efficient way of doing it. And over a period of time, technology will become as important as a value driver as cost. Fair point, right? It happens in every industry. I want you to remember these 2 points. Location savings, technology. We'll link it back to transfer pricing and what business issues it creates. And this is a subset of the point that this is the kind of export growth that we have seen over the past few years. It's very logical. I mean, what has also helped the industry significantly is that the government realized this pretty early on. Does anybody remember, what used to be there before 10A in terms of export benefits? Perfect. And who was it targeted at? Cotton exporters? Till textiles. From 1980 to 1990, before I think all the textiles got shut down because of labor unrest and so on and so forth, India used to be a huge exporter of cotton textiles. And to incentivize those, the government had introduced ATHHC. There were some 6 versions of it. It's the most litigated section, I've been told, in tax holidays. And then there were ATHHE, and then they introduced in a small way export of computer software in ATHHE. And then, I think the potential was clear to everybody, so 10A came, then 10B was there, EOU. You must have heard about this in your tax session just in the morning. You had Paresh speaking about the tax issues. So 10A, 10AA, and that really made the location saving that much more attractive because there was no tax to be paid on the profits. Because if the company earning the profits in India has to pay tax, then it has to offer a slightly higher price to the customer than it can offer. So if I know I'm not going to pay tax on something, I'll give it cheaper. I'll give it cheaper than I would give it otherwise. I'll share some of the tax saving with the client and become more competitive, become more attractive. And that has really, really helped the growth of the industry as well. The unfortunate part, which you must have heard from Paresh, is the fact that, we have given it and then taken it somehow back in form of litigation. But that's another story. But at least we incentivized exporters of computer software and services to set up STPs in huge scales, then EOUs, then SEZs, and now things are getting more matured. Who said 2 years back one of the industry veterans who said that the industry doesn't need tax incentives anymore. Perfect. So that's the maturity it has reached. It seems like we know what we have to do. We are good enough at it. We are competitive. We don't need tax incentives anymore. But we needed them when the industry was a baby. So really, that's the industry perspective. So two things I want you to remember from here. One is location savings. Second is technology. And we'll take the discussion forward. The other trend, which is where I don't think we're getting worried really, but which is the country in Asia we keep on hearing about taking away BPO work from us. And what kind of BPO work they seem to be taking away? The call center type, because they have English speaking graduates like we used to have, and our graduates are becoming more expensive. The attrition rate in India has become too high because people are getting bored with their jobs that much faster. The attrition rate is as high as 35–40% at the junior level. Not all parts of the country have the same ability or effectiveness of speaking skills. So Delhi is, I remember when I was McKinsey, we used to talk about the fact that Chennai is extremely good for mathematical processing work, accounting, invoicing, reconciliations. Bombay is a mixed bag, but you could, if you have commerce related work, banking, transaction processing, then Bombay is, being the financial capital, there are lots of commerce colleges, there are lots of commerce graduates, so Bombay is good with that kind of work. What do you think Delhi was perceived to be good at? Sales. Do I need to add more? Perfect. So that's how business develops. That's how markets develop within markets. Very interesting. Can you see this slide? Because it's very light here. But this is unfortunately the non-business environment, the transfer pricing audit environment, which is just look at some of the points here. The transfer pricing adjustments, and this is not for the IT/ITES industry as a whole, but a significant portion of it will be IT/ITES industry. Over years, $32 billion. That's huge, and a lot of it is frivolous for reasons we will discuss later. But that's a huge number, and that has caused a huge amount of heartburn. And I'll tell you what impact it has had based on what I hear from clients. Some of the newer countries that want to explore India, for example, let's take, have you heard of too many Danish companies, a country from Denmark, Denmark, exploring BPO opportunities in India? Okay, I want to set up a BPO in India. You may not have heard of too many of these. What you've heard of is US, UK, to a good extent. Have you heard of the smaller countries in Europe? Not really, because they don't necessarily have the scale to put 10,000 seats. With 10,000 seats, you can go through a lot of uncertainty, complexity, uncertainty in tax environment, complexity of real estate environment, and so on and so forth. But if you want to set up a 400-seater, can you afford? Because you're saving on 400 seat, maybe 90% of what you were spending, but that 90% will be a small number because it's only for 400 people. What will you look for in the business environment if you want to just set up a 400-seater? You look for absolute certainty that it's easy to walk in, walk out, it's relatively easy to hire and retain, tax environment is credible, is transparent, litigation, I don't mind paying slightly higher markup as long as I know that it will not be litigated. So if you're a businessman of that size and you're going into a new country, that's the kind of environment you're looking for. Till some time back, we didn't even have a separate tribunal for transfer pricing. That came to being some time back, which was a positive move, but it was, someone could say it was the right move, absolutely, but it was too late. It should have come much earlier. And obviously